I'll give you just a brief background about myself. I work in the School of Medicine at Stanford. I'm an ophthalmologist, so I specialize in cataract surgery and glaucoma surgery. I've been working there, and this is going to be my 10th year at Stanford now. I studied biology and medicine, so I was very singularly focused for doing medicine, which is relatively common, also I think in Hong Kong, for example. But when I got to Stanford, that's actually when I got all these other kind of things that started happening to me. Started, doing research. I started inventing things. I translated some tech out of the OTL office. I co-founded a company. I raised venture capital money. We have seed funding to do a consumer health wearable device. And I advise a lot of other startups as well as multinational corporations, like on advisory boards. So that all happened after I started doing medicine. So actually I didn't really have any sort of, I would say, entrepreneurial blood or anything like that. I was just put in an environment where I saw many other successful people who were doing things to change the world, and I wanted to join that environment. And that rich environment helped me become who I am now, and so I share that with everyone else I come across. Particularly, I come back to China, I do volunteer work, eye surgery in mainland China. I come to Hong Kong, I do teaching of entrepreneurship. My research is in AI, blockchain, technology, so I'm very much a high-tech person. And I think this kind of area lends itself well to you guys working in digital health, maybe even in consumer device potentially, to kind of experience the process of the prototyping, iterating, failing, trying again. And this course is about changing the future of medical care and doing it just by understanding the end-to-end process of coming up with something. Because most of the time you guys take a class and you have the project and it's kind of spread out over a quarter or like a year, or maybe you try to apply to get in one of the design thinking classes and there's just too many people in it, so you don't have an opportunity to take it. So I really thought coming up with what's the shortest amount of time I can kind of cover the entire experience. So I want to see, by raise of hands, how many of you are in medicine? Okay, you can take a look around. So we've got a large, diverse group of various levels of training in medicine. And how many people would kind of identify themselves as an engineer, maybe either in hardware or software or developer? Okay, pretty even distribution there. So we did well on our diversity. And how many also would say they're more like business focused? Or after that competition, nobody wants to say that. Great, so you've got quite a diverse group here, and I think that's actually very special. So one of the special parts of this event is the multidisciplinary, including cross-cultural event that's actually not done anywhere else in the world. So you guys are very special. You're receiving something that nobody else receives. This kind of extended training, very ambitious, and you're thinking, well, what can I really learn in a week? But I'll ask you that same question again at the end after you do your presentations, and you can share with me your experiences. I welcome feedback. This is kind of like a startup education course. We've iterated multiple times. I've been teaching this in Beijing, in Brazil, Hong Kong, Stanford, and it's been fun and interesting every single time. So you may think that you might not be able to come up with anything, it's just impossible, but in the end you may surprise yourselves what can be done in this sort of 1-week design sprint. So that's basically talking a little bit why I want to have this kind of event. Does anyone want to say what brought them here to this event? Or how they feel about healthcare? Maybe somebody from Stanford. You guys come a long way. Are you just coming for food in Hong Kong? How about Neil? What brings you to an event like this?
I've been interested in biodesign for a long time, and so that's what really got me excited about the conference. I've done a few hackathons, and none of them really cater to the biodesign process. It's more coming in with an idea and trying to make it work, which is very different from the biodesign philosophy that I've been exposed to. And it's been hard in medical school to get back to biodesign, so this was an exciting opportunity to do that. And I also love to travel and eat, so.
Same with me. So I really have to thank DreamCatchers and Science Park for really making this possible. And they have a vested interest in this process as well, because they really want young companies to try to get started and have a place where they can feel like there's mentorship and resources. When you're a company beginning, you feel like you're all alone and you don't know where to turn, and there are all new things you're learning constantly, and you're constantly pivoting. You're learning all these new words and not sure if you're doing the right thing. That's part of that learning process and why you become better as you keep doing it. And so when we teach these kinds of courses, we're just trying to accelerate that process a little bit, give you a flavor, an introduction, and then you really do the deep dive yourself once you find, oh, that's something I actually didn't know anything about before, or oh, that's something that I find quite interesting and could be something that I can contribute to another team that will have that part that's missing. So this seminar will introduce you to things like regulatory, intellectual property, business modeling. If you're in medicine, you might not know about a lot of those things. Or if you are in engineering, you might not understand the medical landscape and how healthcare is delivered, because you don't have that day-to-day opportunity to be exposed to it. So we start introducing all these concepts. And so our main objectives is really kind of maybe demystify healthcare a little bit. Give you an opportunity to understand why healthcare innovation is complicated, but yet at the same time, it can be super rewarding, especially for builders who make their first device that gets used in patients to help someone. That has a huge impact, and it can be, for me especially, it's very rewarding. I do surgery, so I already get that one-to-one impact and feel the gratefulness of the patients and be able to help people. But what if I want to help 1 million people? Can I do 1 million operations? Probably not in my whole career. But if I can invent something or change the way things are done, then I may have an impact even beyond my own two hands operating. We also use this time to introduce a methodology to improve your chances of success. That's basically what I see biodesign is. It's a process to help you make sure that you don't make the obvious same mistakes that other people are doing. Just like the first time you do the marshmallow challenge, you may make some mistakes that other people made before, but you can learn from that. And then you can be the informed attempt the first time you do your medical startup. And so Biodesign's been around 15 years. It's a very specialized process for medical device in particular, although the same concepts can apply to biopharma and sort of the digital health landscape, which is an emerging new area of doing medicine, remote medicine, telemedicine, things like this. It's constantly changing, but at the same time, it's very exciting. So that's something that we will dive into a little bit. And then the third thing is that I think you'll have an opportunity to appreciate this power of collaboration of a multidisciplinary background and team dynamics. Most hackathons, like you just form your own team, so you show up, you guys like Arduino, so you hang out with someone else who likes to make an Arduino kit or code. You guys like Python, someone else knows the same language. How good is that on a team? You guys do the same thing. You need more diversity, because since healthcare is so complicated, it's ideal to have someone who understands the medical system, someone who can build something, someone who can figure out how to sell it. And if you were very good at all those three things, you'd probably be like 50 years old. By the time to get the depth and expertise of every single one of those areas is almost like a lifetime. So understanding how you can build upon others is very important, and you'll get a chance to do that. We specially picked your teams, so you guys don't get to pick your teams, I'm sorry. But we try to balance them to give you an interesting mix of skills and talents in order to tackle the various specialties that we put you in for immersion. Then finally, what's this all about? Really just to have fun, and compete for the grand prize, right? Everyone wants to win the grand prize. That's kind of like the fun of the hackathons. It's just, it's kind of like cramming right at the end. Just you get that final push, in order to show off to the judges, to impress them what you can do in a very short amount of time. Anyone know how inventions happen? Does anyone vote for A? Idea, money, and magic. Or do you think it's B? Curiosity, failures, persistence, and pivots. Okay, so I see some people like that. Or maybe C. You need to pay attention to the right apple. If you're on the iPhone, you may miss the apple falling. Well, inventions can happen for many different reasons, and I used to think that inventions happen just because you were at the right place at the right time. That was kind of my perspective as a physician. I was studying hard to be very good at surgery and taking care of patients, and I thought, well, the people who also did that and invented something, exited a billion-dollar company, that was the situation. The opportunity came up for them, and I wouldn't have that opportunity necessarily. And so, but then when I came to Stanford and just kind of understood the people who put themselves in the position to make sure that opportunity could happen to them, I started getting a different kind of perspective to that. So certainly all of these things can be relevant to why an invention can happen. So this is the basic framework of biodesign. So if you start studying biodesign, you'll hear about identify, invent, and implement. So if you had to make 3 main steps, you got to figure out what the problem is, you come up with a solution, and you got to make your solution financially viable. You have to have some kind of business behind it if it's going to be sustainable. Otherwise, it may just be a project or something for fun. Where do you think most people start this journey when they're coming up with a new invention?
I don't think it's the way they should start calling on an event. You throw up an idea, it would be really cool if we could make this thing.
Yeah, it's pretty common, right? That you think, oh, I have the next best idea, next best thing since sliced bread. I think everyone's going to love it. Let me go try it out. That is a very common perception, especially at the beginning. Anybody else? Maybe it depends on where your background's from. If you are on the medical side, you may be actually more on the identifying. You're like, man, I'm doing the surgery, this sucks, but I have to do it because this is the tools I have to work with. I wish I was able to make this other tool, but I don't know how to make it. But you identify a problem. So maybe the problem people tend to be in the medical field, whereas the inventing people may tend to be in the engineering field because you're a builder, you're a maker, you're a coder, you're a developer. You know how to make something, but you don't quite know if it's needed or not. You just make it first and then test to see if it's needed. Right? Because you're like, I have this skill, I know how to 3D print this thing, I'm just going to print it and send it out there. That certainly is one way to test something, but maybe isn't the most efficient. You'll see how the biodesign process approaches this. Or finally, maybe it's mostly on, you understand business, you know how to sell something, but you don't have anything to sell. But you're good at implementing. Like, I'm ready to start a company. I can just start a company tomorrow. It's just paperwork. And I know how to build a team, but I don't know how to make anything. I don't have anything to sell. See, so you may come from different angles depending on your perspective, but certainly if you can go through the entire process, from identify to invent to implement, you'll have an opportunity to hopefully do it as efficiently as possible. So that's where this whole design thinking comes into play, and what I call life is short. Identify the need first to avoid wasting time, because the medical life cycle of companies is a long time. You have to go through regulatory approval potentially, especially if it changes something in the human body. And maybe you're only going to get 2 tries in your life if something takes a 10-year cycle in order to figure out how to get it sold, figure out that it's not hurting anybody, it's adding value over an outcome that takes 5 years for you to discover the value. So if you just start working on something without this discipline, then you don't get the multiple chances, in order to see. Certainly some of it is magic. You happen to have a translational discovery that's a Nobel Prize winning thing, and you can make it into something to cure cancer. Yeah, that is great. But not everything will be working that way. So at the same time, you should make sure the need is worth working on. And that's where biodesign really stands out. And we'll go through that. So if you hit the innovation sweet spot, we're talking about feasibility, viability, and usability. So what is it that it's really doing to add value? is it really possible, feasible through technology that exists either now that exists, compared to it didn't exist before? So maybe that's the insight you might have. Or maybe it's a new way of doing business, like the internet changed the way we do business, and so that it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes the business innovation can also be an angle that may change how healthcare could work even. So I keep mentioning this Biodesign. This is something from Stanford that is basically spread around the world. It's almost like evangelism now. And this class is almost like drinking from the fire hydrant because we shove all this information down you in a very short amount of time. Everyone knows the D School and really loves it. It's a place where, I think what's very important for people from Asia is mostly what we care about is accumulating skills and projects. Maybe here it's like you want to score high, you want to be recognized with awards and things like that. That's what you put on your CV. But what does that actually translate to in real life? That certainly helps climbing the ladder of a very structured system for success in terms of getting admitted to the next school or getting your next job potentially. But if you take one step beyond that, we think about Stanford being an agent of change. Does anyone want to comment on what that means? Or what they think that is? Someone from Hong Kong? To be an agent of change. Someone from Stanford want to comment? Sure.
Yeah, I like to think of it as like maximizing impact, I guess. Like rather than getting a bunch of awards and you're saying that building sort of like technical knowledge, it's about like how many people can you help and like how the graphic is.
Yeah, so you want to do something that matters, something that can have high value and high impact, hopefully not too expensive, because oftentimes healthcare is becoming super expensive, and we'll go over, how does healthcare system work, how are things paid for, how does insurance work, and an agent of change could be somebody that's a disruptor. It could be somebody that is not even doing something necessarily for profit or commercial purposes, but even for a social impact or NGO. So there's actually a lot of ways to be an agent of change. And it's kind of a mindset and a personality, something that I often, when I'm in China, Hong Kong, I kind of like to talk about these different perspectives towards education and the way that you have your life philosophy. Like for some of you, you may think, well, if I'm not a designer, I can't make anything, right? But we are in fact all designers in design thinking. When you're a kid, you would just draw something, anything, right? That creativity is actually natural in everyone. You think of those kindergartners doing the marshmallow challenge, and then you think of all that schooling that makes you do the marshmallow challenge differently, like planning, trying to decide which is the best way to prototype first, etc. In fact, we all have that creativity in us, and sometimes school actually stamps it out of you a little bit, and so you have to break out of that mindset of saying what other people have graded you as being good at or not. And so, oftentimes I see this, like learning in Asia, it's a lot of emphasis on recall emphasis. You guys have is it called DSC here, for the exams in Hong Kong that you have to take to get into college, and they have Gaokao in China, and so really, like, what's the right answer? You have to study really hard, memorize all these things, do well on the test. Learning in the US is like practical learning. It's like find the right answer. My kid is playing, learning by doing. Maybe it's not so rigorous in the academic curricula side, and you can argue whether that's good or bad at whatever age. But I think it's very important to make sure that you understand two different kinds of learnings. Maybe some people may say, well, this is Western style of education. Maybe that works postgraduate, but not at a young age. You can debate all those kinds of differences, but I think the importance is that you recognize that there are more than one way as a style of learning, and that both can have a lot of added value. Has anyone heard of the fixed mindset or the growth mindset, what the differences are? Does someone want to tell me what they think? How about someone in the front table here?
Yeah, I haven't heard specifically of this concept, but I actually heard a really good quote recently, which is that you need to sometimes you need to escape from who you think you are in order to become what you could be, right? And trite as that is, I think there's something there about you can have these fixed ideas about who you should be or what you should be working on versus like maybe having a bit more flexibility and being in a growth mindset of what you could work on.
Yeah, growth mindset is like anything's possible. Maybe the fixed mindset is I'm no good at coding. I'm no good at math, right? I did it, I don't understand it. Someone else is good at it, I'll leave it to them. That should be your perspective. You know, you should feel like you can embrace any challenge and anyone can actually be anything if they put their mind to it, get the right resources, be motivated, persevere, and commit. I think that having the growth mindset really helps you as an entrepreneur. You may think that, you know, you're not CEO quality. How do you know that? Or you may think that, you know, you're better to be CTO. Maybe you can be both. You don't know until you really kind of experience it, study it, get feedback, you know, shift according to what your weaknesses and strengths are. Identifying your own self-strengths and weaknesses sometimes will give you a certain kind of mindset, but you have to realize that everyone can grow beyond that. So I think that's very important for getting into this sort of, I'm going to be failing a lot, but I'm going to be pivoting and I'm going to be improving, learning from each failure. You need to have the growth mindset. And we value that in Silicon Valley. You know, failures are something to be proud of, whereas generally in Asia, failures are something to be hidden. They're tucked away. You know, you don't want your family to know if you failed at something. So it is a very different cultural difference, but you know, we've got all different kinds of perspectives in this room, and your team will have a very diverse views on this kind of thing. Okay, so now let's get into, you know, doing startups and companies. Does anyone want to define what a startup is? If they're looking at this graph, this is from Lean Launch. You may see something about searching and executing. What do you guys think is a startup? What over here? It's okay to fail, right? Nobody's going to give you a grade here. Well, in terms of the Lean Launch style, because it has to do with customer validation and customer discovery, so finding the problem through iteration, it's actually a search for a repeatable and scalable business model. Because a company is actually a growth phase. You know, it's something that you execute once you know that the need is there and you have a potential solution and you can make money with it, and now you need to grow that. That's what large companies do. They acquire them, like let's say, you know, in healthcare, they'll be like a Novartis, a big drug company. They'll see that somebody invented a medical device, but that person doesn't have the connections to sell it and distribute it and get into the hands of the users without having to raise a lot of money and time in order to build a whole sales force. So they get acquired to a larger company, like the bigger fish in the smaller pond, who then can actually distribute all of it. So when you're in startup mode, you're actually just looking for what can sell and what can survive. And sometimes I feel like in Biodesign, they actually don't emphasize this that much because they leave the implementation side to much later, and they put heavy emphasis on the identification side and sort of the concept generation brainstorming. But they say, well, implementation, because each is a unique business case, it's very hard to teach to what you should exactly do to implementation. But I think it's very important early on to know what is going to be your repeatable and scalable business model. Even in a hackathon like this, you guys are going to come up with some interesting unmet needs that you observe or read about or do research on. But then you also simultaneously should be thinking about it, well, even if I did have the amazing, greatest, best, perfect solution, how would I get it out there? How would it be paid for? How would people know about it? And that's a business model. And that's probably the thing that you can learn the easiest if you are in medicine and engineering, actually. Sorry for the business people, but business people is the part that you can read yourself and understand the previous cases and figure it out by talking to people. The technical side and the medical training are very hard for someone to learn just by reading. If you're an engineer and a business person, unless you go to med school, because of the amount of volume and information and time involved to learn the medical system, you have to go to med school essentially to learn that. So you'll be introduced this is kind of like an overview, so I'm talking about other things that you'll be hearing over and over throughout the week. Business model canvas. Anybody heard of this before? Raise your hand. Okay, good. Anyone want to say, have they used it before, or do they find it useful? Comments on it? For those of you who said that you've heard about it?
I've used it before. I think it's a really nice way to have your company all on like your activities of your company all out on a single sheet, so that you can get kind of just a broad overview of what's happening.
It helps people who are starting out to have a framework again, kind of like a methodology, to make sure that you don't miss something obvious. So like you're not leaving stones unturned, you can see what all these elements are. And if you haven't done it before, started a company before, you need to think about these things, because these are all really key elements. And mostly what happens is you're hypothesizing, right? You think you're going to sell through this retail store, or you think that the key partner you need is this company in order to make it happen. And what happens in the end is that you have to test it. Again, prototyping, but prototyping in a different way. You actually maybe do interviews and figure out if that's the channel you wish to sell through. So it's a good framework, it's never set in stone, and you can constantly update it, and then it helps you to have discipline and understand what the implementation is going to be should step 1, step 2 of needs identification and inventing concept generation is going well. So actually, even though it looks like there's 1, 2, 3, in my mind, 1, 2, 3 are actually happening fluidly, consistently, all at the same time. And if you have a little bit of experience in 3, then you can do that at 1 and 2. In terms of the identification, your mind will work that way where you can juggle all 3. But if you don't have exposure to that, then it's very hard, and that's why it's taught stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Once you start doing it over and over, you'll see that 1, 2, and 3 can happen simultaneously. I think these are some key takeaways. I've been teaching this for a while, and I've seen many student projects. And I think if you're contemplating a healthcare startup, there are 5 main questions you should be honest with yourself about. If you're starting a company, is this something that is known, or is it more like a research project? In healthcare, there are things that are known, that are published, that are corroborated and validated, and people accept as a standard of care. Or there are things that are experimental and that people are still studying it, or they need more data, or they don't know the outcomes because you don't have enough longitudinal data. And that's more of a research project. When you're trying to start a company, it should already be known, because nobody wants to fund a research project except government institutions or grants. These are other mechanisms of funding, but not VCs. VCs want to make a profit. So if you're going to be pitching and starting a company, make sure the research is already figured out. And then the next thing, number 2, is does it really add value, especially at a lower cost? That's bonus. Or does it just sell more on fear and vanity? You can always sell a new vitamin that maybe doesn't even really work, but you market it very well. You can make money on it. So you should be honest. What is the impact that you're really having? Not saying that doing another energy drink is bad. You can become a billionaire doing that. But you should know where you stand, in terms of what the effect is on society. Number 3, just kind of goes along with that. Is this something that's like doing good, or do you have that ideal scenario where you're making money and doing good simultaneously? Because sometimes it's just you're helping the poor people, but there's no one who's willing to pay for it. Or there's other times where you're helping everyone, and the people who can afford it are subsidizing the poor people, for example. So figure out who your customers really are. Will help you understand if you're more of a social impact venture, or if you're more of a for-profit venture. And you go to different people for those different kinds of things. So those are different types of companies. And it's not to say one is better than the other. Sometimes you're even just a pure nonprofit, like an NGO, non-governmental organization, or a foundation, and you're just doing something to help people. That happens a lot in healthcare, and you can't mix those with being a commercial entity, because there won't be the sustainable, scalable business model. It's more like philanthropy, more like helping people, and not money-making. And I think it's very important for medical people to understand those differences. Because generally as doctors, you just want to help people, and you're never trained in business throughout medical school. You're more trained on just practical things and understanding what's doing right, what's best for the patient. And then finally, which also helps you a little bit, is to know if this is something that's going to be regulated or not regulated. And we'll give you the training on that to understand that. But essentially, if you're regulated, then you know you're in for millions of dollars in a very long time, and your ROI, or return on investment, will not be the same as doing the next Google or the next other kind of internet e-commerce startup, for example. So you have to know who are the people who wish to support that, and is that your own personal goal for that kind of time frame. Regulated devices takes a super long time, a lot of commitment, but in the end can be definitely worth it. And so understanding that will really help. So now we'll switch gears a little bit, and let's go back to the biodesign process. The same things: identify, invent, implement. And this is how they divide it up. You know, the left side is the clinical need, finding the unmet need, and that's the exercise we're going to do right now today. And then we'll leave these other parts, you know, inventing, which is more like the brainstorming. That's going to happen on Wednesday. And then the implementation, like Thursday, Friday, as you're trying to create your pitch deck, you're trying to understand how it's going to be sold, till finishing your business model canvas, getting feedback on a lot of it. That's all going to happen Thursday, Friday, kind of simultaneously while you're building prototypes. But the beginning, this clinical needs finding is a very discrete kind of thing that we'll spend the next 2 days focusing on, because you'll be in the hospitals on Monday, which is a very special thing, by the way. I mean, you know, most people who are non-medical can't get access to the hospital. Maybe if you're a patient yourself, but you know, in terms of just wanting to go shadow it, there's a lot of paperwork involved. There's, you know, especially in the U.S., HIPAA privacy, all kinds of restrictions. So this is a special treat for you who are non-medical to actually go and, you know, be in the hospital setting, even if it's just for a day. Talk to doctors, you know, speak to patients, other healthcare providers, not just the doctor. You could talk to the nursing staff, pharmacists, dentists, etc. So I really think that this is something very unique to the program, because most hackathons, you don't get access to any kind of people to help you like that. You just have to make hypotheses and guess. But here you have actually, you've got WhatsApp, you get their number, message back and forth, get that fast feedback, and it's very helpful for this process. So this is a famous inventor. Anyone know who that is? Oh, sorry, it came out too quick. Always start with the unmet need. You know, Thomas Edison said, I find out what the world needs, then I go ahead and invent it. So that's kind of a different process than coming up with the invention first and then trying to go sell it to people to convince them they need it. You know, many products in Silicon Valley are like that. You know, you need this juicero to squeeze your juice for you. You ever heard of that startup? But Thomas Edison, he was a very good inventor, but most importantly, he was a better need finder. Because better need finder means that you're working on something that's worth working on. So identifying unmet needs, since we talk about this over and over, Paul Yock is one of the basically godfathers, founder of Biodesign process, wrote the textbooks. He says, quote, a well-characterized need is the DNA of a good invention. It's a lot of work to get the need right, but once you are there, the invention will almost certainly follow. And right now you guys don't know what that process is to get to the well-characterized need, but after you do it a few times, you'll eventually understand why this helps put, it's like lining up your ducks, putting everything in order before you get to the building something. The building something is the fun part, right? This seems like the tedious part, but it's very important. Okay, so one of the key things for unmet needs is understanding the components of a need statement. These are things that they just harp on in Biodesign over and over and over. Problem, population, outcome. Most need statements start with this phrase, particularly, a way to. So a way to address some kind of problem in some kind of population with some kind of outcome that's measurable, so that you can know if you made a difference with the problem. Because if it's not something measurable, how are you going to know if you solved the problem or not? That's like one of the key elements, and one of the harder elements for a non-medical person is the understanding the outcome. doctors may understand the outcome because they already deliver the medical care, but a non-doctor would not know what is significant or non-significant. That's where you need your team to help you. So each team is going to have 1 or 2 medical people, and that is the medical person's job and contribution, is to make sure you understand that the problem's a real problem, and that you have a way to measure it in order to show improvement when you're going to convince people to give you money. Right? Because essentially to solve things, yes, you do need money, because you need to test it out. And it may not be a lot of money, or in some cases it may be a lot of money, like a new drug or new implantable device. But again, it's the same process. How big is the unmet need? Who is it in? How are you going to show that you're going to make a difference? Usually needs, they come from observations, and some observations may be like, this guy's saying, I hate my glasses. Anybody wear glasses like this? Or you don't wear it because you don't want to be seen in glasses like that? So one way to come up with a need statement for this kind of observation is to say, a way to minimize glasses frames in order to maintain the natural beauty of the face. What do you think is the invention that came out from that statement? Contact lens, I heard. Yes. Now, let's say we take that same problem and we phrase the need statement a little differently. A way to permanently restore 20/20 vision to maintain the natural beauty of the face. What do you think invention came out of this? Very good. So you can see there, even with the same problem and a little bit of change in the need statement, may actually direct you in a different way in terms of your solution. And so that's what's really important when it comes to figuring out a need statement and doing something we call need scoping, where you'll figure out what level the problem is, who exactly is your customer base, or patient base, or physician base, or whoever you're solving it for, and then it could have the same outcome potentially. How about when someone looks at a problem like this? I wish my horse isn't so slow and wouldn't get tired so easily. Anyone think that's a good need statement? Or would phrase it differently? Okay, that's good. Anyone else? Because depending on what you comment on, you may think, well, because you're commenting on a horse, therefore you're going to try to do something to the horse to make it better. However, what if you said it was a way to transport people quickly and reliably? Then maybe you'll come up with a car rather than a horse. You totally get rid of the horse to begin with. But you see how if you are very focused on what is currently being done, you may only do an incremental innovation. But if you phrase it in a way where let's take every possible new way of doing it, that's part of the concept generation and brainstorming, you may change your need statement. So remember, you're never really fixed in your need statement, but it might be a fluid process where whatever's lower hanging fruit or easier to do or able to accomplish, it could be incremental, or it could just be the blue sky. Like you went from when it was all horse and buggies to actually an automotive engine. So this also gets into the concept that we call superseding needs, because the need may be like, I want to cure cancer, right? I mean, that's a huge need, right? If you're able to solve all of our medical problems, like I want to solve, prevent atrial fibrillation. But the way it really works is that you have to understand the pathophysiology or the medical background behind all the problems, so you can see which level of the problem you may be able to attack better. Like for AFib, anybody know what that is? Medical person? So you could be at the level of, well, I'm blocking those clots from happening to cause loss of blood flow. Or I could even stop it from even forming a clot to begin with, or I can even restore the natural heartbeat so there's no more arrhythmia. So you can see how that's varying levels, but you can only get to that depth if you have the medical understanding of the pathophysiology, the mechanism of action. And so that's where research is very important, where you can go into the literature and see what people have tried, where the current understanding is. Is it like we have no idea why the brain does this? Maybe it's very hard then to solve the problem because you don't even know what the cause is. How can you come up with a solution? But if you may have identified a cause and see that there's no solution for that, that may be something worth working on because it may be a good gap. if there's very easily, as a medically trained person or as an engineer who's working in medical device, who's constantly doing this process and studying the disease processes, that's why people have focuses, right? We're not like a medical specialist of the whole body. I'm a medical specialist of a one tiny little part inside the eye, not even the eye, but a part of the eye, right? That's how we're breaking down the body. When you get to that level of detail, you may have a better chance for coming up with an interesting medical innovation. So again, in terms of the incremental need versus the blue sky zone where you can have a huge impact, but it may be extremely difficult, or it may be something very small, still impactful, but not the same level of impact. So left side incremental needs, you create a small surgical instrument to make that procedure a little bit faster, that's better. Or you create a solution where you don't even need the surgery anymore, then that's over on the blue sky zone. And where you fall along that path may be relevant to your team's skill set, to your time. This is what we call strategic focus. So we'll get into understanding why would you go after something that's either more incremental or more blue sky? What are your resources? What are your time? What is your skill? Things like that. And personally, I have a philosophy of actually doing incremental innovation first. And the reason why I think that works better is because for the blue sky things, you generally need to raise a ton of money. You need to be like, hopefully a serial entrepreneur because it makes it easier because now you've been vetted as someone who can accomplish things and you can take larger amounts of money and they know you're not just going to frivolously waste it. Or not be experienced enough and make a lot of mistakes and learn off their money. They want to have the highest chance of success. So I started off as just a doctor with no business training, with no engineering skill, nothing. So incrementally, I worked on smartphone devices, something that, because 3D printing was happening, because we could do things for really cheap, we invented an adapter to add to the smartphone to turn into a camera, like a remote camera to do like a remote triage, telemedicine, and this was back in 2013, 2014. The idea was born in 2012, so it actually only took 2 years for us to invent the device, get regulatory approval, and start selling it. And after that, I was hooked. I was sold. Wow, this is something that is not just like a dream. You can actually make it happen. And so the incremental side, because that was not actually a company, that was more of like a product. So we licensed that product to a company. I consider that incremental. Something very small. We didn't raise a lot of money. We just got some grant money. Just $50,000. We're not talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. But then now I'm working more on the other side because I have a little bit of reputation. We could raise $1 million, and then maybe if I could exit that company, I could raise $10 million. It's something bigger, blue sky. So that's just my personal philosophy, is working from incremental to blue sky. But depending on your life situation, who you know, who you meet, you may just go straight to blue sky. You may have like a backer who really wants you to work on their personal medical problem. Okay, here's a test. Because I said that the need statement was most important. Can you fill in the blanks? Everybody out loud? Oh wait. What goes in there? Problem? Population. In order to? Okay, good. Okay, you're listening. Proud of you guys. This is a long lecture. So, scoping is like playing with each one of those things, because the problem, as we showed you, could change. The population could change. You can take the whole population, or you can take just people under 60, or you could just take females under 60, or you could just, do people that come into the clinic. I mean, there's a lot of ways to scope all these different things, and pretty soon we'll do that exercise. I think our paperwork is over there. So you can change each one of those things and experiment with different levels of specificity. So here I'll give you an example to kind of get you warmed up, because you're going to be doing this. So I'm an ophthalmologist. Here's my example. A way to treat patients who suffer from dry eye. Anybody have dry eye? Is that a big problem? Is it? Does it bother you? Yeah, right? People who are programmers probably have dry eye sometimes because they're staring at a screen, 24 hours, and they're not blinking enough, and they get evaporative dry eye. Well, you can actually scope dry eye if you understand the pathophysiology of dry eye. Where is it coming from? Maybe it's a way to treat patients who suffer from moderate dry eye, because we have scales of how severe the dry eye can be. and there's definitions on that you can look up. Or it could be the mechanism, like a way to treat patients who suffer from evaporative dry eye disease, because your brainstorming around these different kinds of need statements may take you in different directions based on your understanding of what the problem is and what the potential solutions to fix those problems are. Or if you start getting a much more detailed understanding, we call that critical insight, a way to restore the natural lipid layer of the tear film in patients who suffer from evaporative dry eye disease. And see how you're getting very more specific here? It's a better need when you're more specific, because you'll have something that's more easily measurable, that has something that has a defined outcome, and it actually is restoring something to natural layer because you know the pathophysiology that the tear film has 3 layers, the lipid layer is a problem in certain kinds of dry eye, you have certain potential things that can help that specific layer. So this is an idea of scoping. And yes, it's hard if you're not a specialist in the area. So that's why we've got mentors. We've got people that you call upon. It's like phone a friend for anything you don't know. If you can quickly get to the answer, like calling upon someone who you do know, who might know the answer, then that gets you going faster, in terms of your innovation process. So stage 1 of this whole innovation process, needs finding. You try to find as many needs as possible, mostly through observations and interviews, and we have a lecture on this of how to do that effectively this afternoon. Some of the kind of the broader concepts are doing customer development interviews. Anybody done that before for any of their projects, or intern at a startup or anything? Making even cold calls. So you can basically help figure out how big your problem is, or who is it a problem in. Because you will have hypotheses, like on your business model canvas, but you need to test the value proposition that you have. It's very important to make sure that you identify what we call pains and gains, which is on the right side of the business model canvas. And those are very specific in healthcare, because pains and gains are kind of easy to understand when it's like a new food delivery service, or some kind of e-commerce business, some finance thing. But in healthcare it might be a little harder because it's more esoteric about what's considered efficient, or how much cost moves the needle, how much does it really change. That's where you got to go do the interviews, and you got to figure out. You got to talk to the purchasers, you got to talk to the administrators, you got to talk to physicians, the key opinion leaders, we call them KOLs. Who are the people who know, who can help you? Is it worth it if it works? And would it substantially decrease adverse, or maybe for the amount of time saved, they don't care, And you wouldn't know that unless you asked them. So that's very key. Understanding the saving, reducing morbidity, mortality, hospital readmissions, it could cost a lot of money, things like that. Those are for outcomes. So once you kind of get more sophisticated at this process, figuring out a value proposition and the unmet need, because they kind of go hand in hand together, is it called product market fit, when you have the unmet need and you have the solution and they can go well. It's actually that a compelling clinical need is because you verified it, which all this research and background information, and it really improves the outcome or reduces the bad outcome relative to the current standard of care at a reasonable cost. So there's a value and a cost function that are very important in healthcare that can be more complicated to understand than the traditional value and cost when you just go buy a coffee. That's an easy one-to-one transaction that you can understand what someone might be willing to pay for. But when it comes to healthcare, how much would you be willing to pay for your hip surgery? You probably have no idea. How much is currently paid? Not a lot of transparency. It's actually hard to figure out. And then how much is worth this new tool? You gotta talk to a lot of people. And that's where hustling comes involved. That's where really the entrepreneurship skills to figure out those questions is very paramount in order to succeed. And then generally, the other key thing is clinical needs are technology agnostic. Because the typical pattern is I've got this new virtual reality device. I'm going to do the testing with that device. So I'm going to test peripheral vision testing. Let's just put it on VR or something like that. That's because technology is sexy. It's attractive. It's fun to work with, and you want to play with it. But you want to make sure that that's the right technology to play with, because actually maybe VR is the wrong thing to play with, and instead you should have been doing electrical neurostimulation. And people are like, whoa, what's that? So the key is to make sure that you're not sort of wedded with one technology because that's your skill set and that's what you love so much. Okay, so here's an example need statement. A way to perform point-of-care testing in patients with skin lesions in order to enable accurate, inexpensive diagnosis of malignant melanoma by a dermatologist. Sounds very complicated right now, but I think what's important here is that you don't want to already have solutions at the time you're coming up with your needs statement. So don't already, you may be thinking, oh, this is like a smartphone, telemedicine, blah, blah. Don't do that, because if you do that, you won't be able to think outside the box or get out of that mold of saying, well, it's going to be an internet, AI, smartphone-based thing. So that's the key, is no solutions allowed while you're working on your team. This is purely unmet needs, scoping, and making sure that you define a need with what we call eventually a need specification. What are the need specification and criteria for you to actually then do brainstorming on that need? I think this will all come together once you start doing it. Right now I'm just kind of giving you the overview, but essentially you do the unmet needs, and then eventually you do need screening, because you're going to come up with a ton of needs and you don't know which one to working on. And there's some basic filters to help you understand which need is worth working on in relation to it being a potential scalable business model. And these things are market assessment, number one, disease state research, number two, competitors, which is called the treatment landscape, understanding what already exists, and the stakeholder analysis. And that's a very specific thing to healthcare. Who are the people who can help you or hurt you for your new invention? And so these four things are very taught specifically for Biodesign to make sure that your unmet need is worth working on. Does anyone know how to do a market assessment? I expect a business person to speak up. What would you, if you were to explain to a doctor how to do a market assessment, meaning that you don't need to give them that much detail, what would you say?
So I would start with basically how many people are affected by the problem, and then how much value would people associate with in terms of solving that problem.
Yeah, that's good. So like dollars and numbers, how many people and how much money. And you may think about something like the total available market, or your served available or addressable market, or maybe your target market where you're starting. These are things that are general frameworks to help you understand, is this $1 billion business? Is this which then you may raise venture money, or is this a lifestyle business, maybe $20 million a year annual revenue? And so you may approach it very differently depending on where you fall. Who are you going to reach? Yeah, everyone wants to do the total market, but how do you get to the total market? That's very hard to capture, particularly in healthcare. Disease state fundamentals are something that is easy to understand when you're in medicine. It's basically knowing the pathophysiology, what is already known and what is not known. What is research-based or what is confirmed and already sort of established. What's the mechanism of action? And particularly for the medical people, I would focus on what already works in another field that could work in the field you're in now. So that's what's quite special. Generally, the doctors are very laser-focused to their own specialty. I'm very focused in ophthalmology, but sometimes I go around and watch nephrology or something else, cardiology, because you may actually give a different perspective or mindset in the field that you don't do every day. And that's also why we just assign you to various different specialties, and you have to do some innovation within that specialty. So once you get, you guys will have a need statement, but if you want to get a good need statement, you're able to articulate the problem with some special insight related to pathophysiology in order to change an outcome that is meaningful to satisfy the problem. Because you may change the outcome, but it's not meaningful. It doesn't move the needle enough. People don't care. You have to get to what people care about, and it should have a special insight so that hopefully then it's protectable. It's something that you can do as a business and no one else can even potentially copy you or replicate you, etc. So that special insight and knowing how much impact you need on the outcome is very critical. So here's market landscape. One way to do competitive analysis is do something called a gap analysis. So this is basically looking at, for example, in wound dressing. How do you take care of chronic wounds? So you have this open wound, you're in the hospital. You can change it, with compression dressings. Doesn't cost that much, but it takes a really long time to heal. Or you can do a negative pressure wound, because that's something very specific to the pathophysiology, but it costs a lot. So it's efficacious, but it's very expensive. You need an expensive piece of equipment, you gotta stay in the hospital for a long time, that costs a lot. Well, maybe the opportunity then is that something that's equally efficacious as the gold standard, but doesn't cost as much. So that's where potential opportunity could lie. So if you map the competitive landscape, you know all the different current treatments in the current country or even in other countries, or depending on the socioeconomic status, you may find that your sweet spot is particularly at a certain level of side effect to efficacy trade-off, because generally everything in medicine, nothing's perfect. Although I could say cataract surgery is almost perfect. We have a very high rate of success. But generally in medicine, there's some morbidity and mortality trade-off, as well as a cost trade-off. And that's where you're trying to find the sweet spot. And simultaneously, with understanding business, if you're the first player in the market, or if you're the fast follower, meaning that there's an already established monopoly or established multiple players, you actually will approach solving the problem differently in terms of your business model canvas potentially. There's sometimes an advantage to first to market, but maybe not, because sometimes you have to spend a lot of money to educate the market or do something that other companies who are fast followers don't need to do. So depending on the situation, you actually start diving into these details, and that helps with your implementation understanding simultaneously while you're thinking of your concepts. Right? Because if you have your concepts and you already know how much effort it's going to take for that concept to get used, like if nobody already uses it, then maybe it's going to take a lot of money and time. If people already use it and you're piggybacking on it, maybe that's the opportunity. So understanding that is helpful. Anyone have ever heard of a stakeholder analysis? Yes. What's that?
What is it? So basically what you do is you look at the different categories of stakeholders in the system, whether they be patients or clinicians or payers or caregivers or whatever, and then you basically look at,
Here we go.
8 or 10.
You named a bunch of these already?
Um,
Patients, physicians, etc.
And then you basically identify what is their vested interest in the need area. Are there certain things that they require from the solution? Are they supportive of solving the need? And basically what is blocking them from solving the need?
Right. Healthcare is complicated. You've got insurance companies involved. You've got government involved. You've got hospital administrators involved. You have the doctors. You have the patients. You have so many people where you want it to be a win-win-win for everyone, because then you have the best chance to succeed. But oftentimes, if you're changing your standard of care, maybe somebody doesn't like that and they want to block you. You should know that before you're starting your company. So that's why this biodesign process can also help you as you're doing your needs filtering and figuring out which need to work on. Well, maybe there's too many people who are against me because you're trying to create an AI to eliminate the doctor's job. They won't want to use that. Maybe, I don't know. So you got to figure out what is worth working on. Will they help you or block you? And also, while you're going through all these different needs through your experiences, you may have different factors or criteria that is unique to each team of what's worth working on to you. What are your time and resources? What stage of life are you at? How big of a company are you trying to build? Are you trying to IPO, or you just want something that you can just sell off really quick, exit, license? You're not ready to put the time and commitment for something that's bigger. You should kind of know those, understand what's coming up in the market. So maybe the opportunity is now because there's no competitors, but in 5 years it's not a good opportunity because you know that all the competitors' approvals by the FDA will be ready by then. And so, understanding those kinds of things will really help you also to filter to which need is worth working on, even before you work on the need, right? Again, these are all things that is the time, blood, sweat, and tears put up front before you go ahead and spend money building something, or spend your time, sweat equity, building it. You should figure that out, and again, you put yourself in your best chance for success, and you make it much more efficient, time saving. Because then once you get to your top needs, you come up with need criteria, which is the short list of requirements that any perfect solution must offer in order to satisfy those stakeholders, to satisfy the outcome, competitive landscape, what already exists, how much does it cost. There's something called must-haves and nice-to-have. And this is actually a fluid list, because sometimes the must-haves go up in the need statement, and other times the must-haves fall down below, and you don't have to put it into the need statement because you don't want to restrict your brainstorming by so much by putting it into the need statement. Again, that's blue sky versus incremental. There'll be differences in this process. But remember, it's not really fixed in stone, just like people are pivoting all the time. But it's good to have this as you're brainstorming because you can tie back your potential concepts to what's absolutely critical for this to succeed versus, well, it'd be nice for that, but it's not absolutely critical. So again, as we go back to that previous need statement, a way to perform point-of-care testing in patients with skin lesions in order to enable accurate, inexpensive diagnosis of malignant melanoma by a dermatologist. Anyone know malignant melanoma? Is that a term? Skin cancer? Yeah, very bad one. There are some must-haves and some nice-to-haves. So in this team's idea, they thought that in order to diagnose, what is the sensitivity specificity? So someone who is a stats person can understand what are the cutoffs when you screen in order to catch most of the cases. So you have a certain cutoff that maybe the FDA requires, or prior diagnostic tests already set the example, and you're trying to beat that threshold, for example. That's how you come up with some of these things. And then the more nice to haves is, yeah, maybe if it's disposable, it's nice, but it's not necessary, but maybe you can make more money by having a disposable component, things like this. So you can move things back and forth. And this is very helpful as you then finally get to one that you're going to move forward with. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a session here where you guys at your tables will try to come up with a need statement. If you can come up with need specs, nice to haves, must haves, that's bonus. But at least you should have some need statement and some reason why you think it's a compelling need statement, hopefully. And that involves, you guys are all resourceful, going on your smartphone, doing some reading, phoning your friend, surfing the web. So right now we'll draft a preliminary need statement, and we have all the clinical vignettes on the handout. So let me see if I can get someone to hand that out. Can you hand out the 2 per table? Yeah. Just, there's 10 vignettes. You can just pick any one you want to work on. There'll be 2 copies per table. And we'll spend 15 minutes doing this. So one of the most important things is tip number 1. Do not embed a solution into the need statement.
So I'm just going to pick one, which was our first need statement. A way to address depression and loss of purpose in elderly populations suffering from age-related visual impairment and cognitive decline in order to increase their quality of life.
Very good. So I see you came up with 4 when I only asked for 1. That's very impressive. Awesome. Anybody have any comments?
I was going to say quality of life is tough to measure or quantify.
That's true. Quality of life, there are some ways to try to measure it that you can look up in the literature. But having easy standards to measure on quality of life, there's various surveys or various kind of things you can do. But you have to realize whether those are research endpoints or those are clinical endpoints. Because what actually happens in the clinic may not be what happens in the research world. Because you need to define things well in order to publish things. But maybe in the real world, those things, the blur, the definitions, it's a different definition. So that's very important on that. Okay, good job. We'll move over here.
So this is number 8. We are doing topic number 4, and the topic is the effects of isolation. So we are going to provide a way to increase the chance for the retired elderly to live longer and give them more meaningful socialization tools.
And trying to reduce the mental stress level.
Can you say the whole sentence one more time, I think?
Okay, so we are going to provide a way to increase the chance for the retired elderly who live alone, the meaningful socializations for them to reduce the stress and the headlines of mental health problems.
Any comments? Is it clear the problem? I understand the outcome. Reduce this. Increased chance is a problem, so that you're saying that it's a big problem right now that they don't, or that they have. Okay, so way to improve socialization. Just make sure that it's very clear that right away people can pick out the main problem. The more defined it is, then the easier it is to pick out. Okay, we'll move on over here.
So we did number 8, venous complication. So our need statement is seniors with venous ulcers with restricted range of motion needs a way to provide better blood flow in them and decrease application time of the device in order to prevent or decrease future venous ulcers by at least what the SOX was providing. Yeah.
Any comments on that? It does. You do need to do a little bit of research to get more hard endpoints because you have the qualitative, but it's not very quantitative yet. But that's good. And then sometimes you may move things up and down on the nice to haves, must haves. Since when the need statement becomes very long, then it sometimes becomes very cumbersome to work off of. So you can also get to efficiency level in your need statement. Okay, we'll go over here.
We did number 2, the skin tears one, and ours is not very poetic, but a way to reduce the amount of bleeding in elderly patients on blood thinner medication in order to reduce the number of times a patient needs to see a doctor or physician intervention is needed.
Any comments?
I like that a lot. I wonder how extent to which you can attribute the outcome to the actual solution of the problem. Because those patients may still see solutions for other reasons. So I think narrowing the outcome may be helpful. But
Well, I guess in the problem there was I guess in the problem it sounds like a lot of doctors had run and stop bleeding. So yeah. I get in an emergency stop the bleeding situation, we don't really care. I mean, we do care, but in this one, we don't really care about reducing how many doctors for checkup visits.
Again, you can put some specificity into your must-haves and nice-to-haves as well to help you clarify those things.
Yeah, so we also chose number 2, skin tears, a little bit of competition. So we said, a way to reduce avulsions of the epidermis in elderly patients on blood thinners in order to reduce recurrent hospitalizations.
Okay, so it's good to see that even when 2 people pick the same problem, that they can vary up their need statements.
We were working on problem number 6. And our need statement was a way to reduce multi-step dependencies in the diagnostic of microvascular dysfunction in patients with commonly associated risk factors to enable quicker and more accurate diagnosis of microvascular dysfunction.
Any comments? Sometimes you don't have to put multiple risk inside there because it can be a little redundant, or it's better to be a little bit more specific. Because I think also because then you can hone in on your concept generation a little more specifically, like one group. Otherwise, you're going to be encompassing many groups who have many different reasons for those risk factors, and then it becomes harder to solve it for all of them all at once. So more specificity will help.
We worked on problem 4. It's about the effective isolation among elderlies in nursing homes. And our statement is a way to increase social interactions among nursing home residents in order to improve mental health status along the geriatric depression scale.
Comments? Okay, I think that's something that's good that you can work off of. How about over here?
A way to address,
We did number 5 for decreasing mobility.
a way to address the failure of independent mobilization to perform daily function in the elderly with physiological muscle atrophy so they can lead a more independent and healthy life.
Any comments on that one? Healthy life. Yeah, you should probably put how you measure those things, because generally in the statement, the outcome is more specific than just if you know, because you can say that for a lot of problems. You should move the needle by a certain amount. So what is significant that's currently happening to it shows that you understand the problem more, and then you know how much to reduce it by in order to make it significant innovation. So if you get to the detail of the problem like that, then
Chose number 10, vision loss. Our statement is a way to increase the ability to perform daily activities independently in wheelchair-bound patients suffering from visual impairment in order to decrease the burden on and hence increase the life quality of patients and their caretakers.
any comments? Of course, in these exercises, everybody doesn't have a lot of time to get into a lot of depth on a problem, so certainly you're going to try, to reduce falls or decrease quality of life, things like that. But I think once you actually also get into understanding problems deeper, because you can get to more causative analyses, then you can get to more metrics that are more like medically measurable based on testing and other things. Otherwise, it stays sort of like holistically in general right now, but that's fine. Just try to get as specific as possible.
We did number 8, venous complications. Our statement is a way to assist with compression socks for patients that are elderly, obese, or immobile that enables them to adhere to their treatment for prevention of DVT.
Okay, any comments?
We talked about this a little bit too since we had number 8, and we weren't sure if that puts a solution in the need statement since it talks about compression socks specifically, and maybe, I guess it's a scoping question, but maybe there's a better way to increase circulation or restore circulation than compression socks for seniors at least.
Yeah, that's true. If your whole goal is to specifically do something only on the compression socks, then you can put it into your need statement, although that will tend to change your concept generation process. So you should be aware of that or have a reason why you do that on purpose. If that is like the de facto gold standard thing and it's already very good, but there's one little problem within that, that is the thing that needs to be solved, you can use that. But generally we don't like to embed solutions if you're trying to go for something brand new. Okay, so good job everyone. That's the end of this lecture. Lunch is about to arrive very soon. So what we're going to do now is we're going to find out your cheats.